Hello and welcome to the Biological Resources Information Program for the Merced River Bridge Project. This training is provided by Alluvian Biological Consulting. Now this training has four broad objectives. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be familiar with all four of these points. First, we're going to cover the definition and implications of take. Then we'll move on to your responsibilities if you encounter a regulated species. We'll have a brief introduction to the protected species associated with this project, and then we'll go over some general mitigation measures that need to be followed in order to prevent any incidents of take. We'd like to emphasize that this training is meant to supplement, not replace, the training information handouts that you should have received before watching this video. If you have not received a training pamphlet or booklet, please request one from your supervisor or on-site alluvian biologist. Let's start by discussing take. Take is a broadly defined term, and under the Federal Endangered Species Act, take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, capture, collect, or attempt to engage in any such conduct. Now, penalties for take will vary from species to species. However, any individual found to be committing unsanctioned take may be dealt hefty fines, and in some cases up to a year in jail time. These penalties are assessed for each instance of unsanctioned take. So what should you do if you encounter a regulated species on the project? The very first thing you should do is ensure that you do not touch or approach the animal. You should then immediately suspend work within the area the animal is found, especially if this work would result in take. Your next step is to notify your supervisor or the on-site biologist. If a biologist is not on site, please contact Gennaro Lockhart at the number listed on this slide and in your training materials. Unless otherwise noted in your materials, a 100-foot no-work buffer will need to be established around the species of concern until it either moves off the project site of its own volition or until permission is received from regulatory agencies to reduce or eliminate the no-work buffer. The next few slides will give you a brief overview of all of the listed and regulated species that occur on this project site. Western burrowing owl is a small, brown, mottled owl that stands about 7 to 9 inches in height. True to its name, the burrowing owl nests in a hole in the ground. Although it's quite willing to dig its own burrow, it often uses one that's already provided by prairie dogs, skunks, ground squirrels, or other wildlife. Burrowing owls require habitat with open, well-drained terrain, short, sparse vegetation, and underground burrows. During the breeding season, they may also need enough permanent cover and taller vegetation within their foraging range to provide them with sufficient prey. Because of this, burrowing owls can occupy a wide range of habitats, including grasslands, agricultural areas, urban vacant lots, as well as the margins of airports. Breeding in California can start as early as January and continue through September. The peak of breeding is in April. Burrowing owls can lay anywhere between 1 to 11 eggs. The young hatch in about 30 days and fledge after 45 days. They will remain at the burrow for some time, foraging at night with the adults, until they're ready to fledge on their own. Swainson's hawk is a medium to large-sized hawk with adults getting up to 21 inches in length with 52-inch wingspans. Their plumage is variable, and there are usually two color morphs. The first morph is a light phase, which have dark heads, breast bands, and light bellies, while the dark phase birds are going to be sooty black. Both color phases have bicolored underwings, dark gray flight feathers, lighter wing linings, a broad tail, and long, relatively narrow pointed wings. In March and April, they arrive on breeding grounds in the Solano and Central Valley counties, as well as the interior valleys of the coastal ranges. Breeding habitat includes woodlands, savanna, grasslands, and scattered trees. Swainson's hawk require large tracts of grassland and open land for which to forage. During migration and foraging, they use open lowlands, and these hawks typically occur at elevations from sea level to 1,500 feet. Tricolor blackbird is a medium-sized passerine bird with a conical beak. Male breeding plumage is almost entirely black and carries a distinctive red shoulder patch bordered by white fringe. These blackbirds can be found nesting in freshwater wetland vegetation as well as agricultural fields, and their diet consists primarily of insects and seeds. This species forms the largest nesting colonies of any passerine bird, with a 10-acre area containing between 50 to 20,000 nests. Nests are built in dense vegetation with plenty of cover, and breeding takes place from mid-April to late July. Females rear up to 2 broods of 4 chicks per nesting season. Incubation can last up to 2 weeks, with another 2 weeks required for nestlings to fledge. This section applies to all of the bird species that has been previously covered and any other species covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act or California Department of Fish and Wildlife Fish and Game Code 3503. A variety of bird species have been found nesting in or immediately adjacent to Caltrans right-of-ways. Nest sites are often placed in crevices, cavities, seams, or weep holes within bridges. Other nests are constructed on open vertical cement surfaces on bridges. The species that utilize man-made structures as nest sites tend to be more tolerant of urban conditions. These conditions might be increased noise, light, vibration, or simply human presence. But they can nonetheless be sufficiently disturbed during construction or maintenance activities enough to cause nest abandonment or inattentiveness, which would result in the death or loss of eggs or juveniles. Incubation and brood rearing require approximately 4 to 5 weeks for smaller birds, but can take up to 12 weeks for larger raptors. And this is why it's incredibly important that we get nest deterrents up on the project site and prevent nesting as soon and as often as possible. Chinook salmon is the largest species of salmon found in the United States. Apart from their size, adults can be identified by the black spots on their back as well as on their dorsal, adipose, and tail fins. The gums are usually dark at the base of the teeth, and breeding individuals range in color between olive brown to purple. Chinook salmon are anadromous, which means they're born in freshwater, then migrate to the ocean, and then return as mature adults to freshwater to their natal streams to spawn. Breeding adults die shortly after spawning, but eggs are deposited within coarse gravel in streams and fast-flowing water. And depending on the water temperature, eggs may hatch after 90 to 150 days. Young fry will remain up to 2 years in streams before migrating to the ocean to complete the majority of their growth. Steelhead is an anadromous Pacific salmon species, typically 19 to 13 inches in length. The breeding coloration for this species looks like that of coho salmon. However, steelhead males do not develop the hook-shaped mouth as coho salmon do. Steelhead also look noticeably slimmer than other salmonids. Steelheads are anadromous, born in freshwater, migrating to the ocean, and returning as mature adults to their natal streams to spawn. Most breeding adults die shortly after spawning, although 9% of individuals are repeat spawners. Eggs are deposited within gravel beds and streams with fast-flowing water. And depending on the water temperature, eggs hatch after 21 to 28 days. Young fry will remain up to 3 years in these streams and lakes before migrating to the ocean to complete the majority of their growth. Hardhead is a freshwater minnow species endemic to California. Adults typically reach 12 inches in length. Its dorsal coloration is brown to bronze with silvery sides and underbelly, and hardhead prefer pools of deep and clear water with rocky or sandy substrates. These preferred pools are typically found alongside large to medium-sized streams. Hardhead are widely distributed throughout the Sacramento and San Joaquin River drainages. During the breeding season, adults swim upstream from their home pools to river tributaries to spawn. Fertilized eggs are deposited in sand or gravel near riffles, runs, or heads of pools, and females may lay up to 23,000 fertilized eggs. KERN brook lamprey are an eel-like fish species endemic to California. Lampreys have a round, sucker-like mouth, but unlike other California species, the KERN brook lamprey is non-predatory. meaning that it does not parasitize other fish species at any point in its life history. This species is also relatively small compared to other similar species, with adults reaching total lengths between 3.5 to 5.5 inches. Adults prefer backwater habitats with coarse cobble associated with large rivers near foothill regions. The biology of KERN brook lampreys is still poorly understood. However, their populations are believed to be in decline. San Joaquin kit fox is a small fox measuring about 32 inches in length. It's one of 8 recognized subspecies of kit fox, and it's the smallest known canin. Individuals usually exhibit gray to buff fur along their backs, sides, and tails, as well as white fur along their bellies. Kit foxes can be distinguished from other fox species by their relatively diminutive size and their overlarge ears. This subspecies can be found throughout the arid regions of Southern California, and it prefers to inhabit annual grasslands with scattered shrubs and scrub, utilizing complex burrow systems for shelter. Kit foxes excavate burrows in loose soil and may construct up to 36 entrances for a single den. A single kit fox may utilize between 3 and 26 such dens. San Joaquin kit foxes reach breeding age at approximately 2 years, and pups are born in February through May. Females nurse broods of 1 to 7 pups until they've weaned in approximately 4 to 5 months. Roosting bats are protected by California Department of Fish and Wildlife Code 4150, and many of the habitats and structures associated with Caltrans right-of-ways have been found to be inhabited by bats. A total of 18 species of bats have been found to use bridges in California in one way or another. Roosts are places that provide security and protection where bats can rest, sleep, hibernate, mate, socialize, or feed. Roosts can take many forms and may be found in rock crevices, gaps in concrete or steel structures, trees, bridge weep holes, and many others. Bats prefer to roost in places that are in close proximity to their open foraging grounds. In many cases, you won't see bats in their roosts, but you will see traces of guano and bat droppings outside of these roost crevices, so this is something you should look out for on your job site. Northwestern pond turtle is a medium-sized turtle. The color ranges anywhere between brown to olive brown to blackish, and the shell is going to be anywhere between 3.5 to 8.5 inches long. The species can be identified from the lines and spots that radiate from the center of the scutes, and the scutes are the bony plates that make up the shell of this animal. Males of this species tend to have a light throat and no markings and a relatively flat shell, and females are going to have dark markings around their throat and have a noticeably taller shell. The species typically inhabits ponds and creeks and hibernates underwater for several months during the winter. Western pond turtles reach breeding age at about 8 to 10 years of age. Breeding usually takes place in April and May, and what females will do is they'll climb onto land on the water margin and dig a nest. They'll lay a clutch of around 2 to 11 eggs, and those eggs will gestate for about 80 to 100 days before they'll hatch. The valley elderberry longhorn beetle is a 1-inch long dark beetle with green markings. The body is black with red wing coverings, while the forewings are dark metallic green with a bright reddish-orange border. The shell has numerous puncture marks or indentations. The body is elongated and usually cylindrical. Color and strong association with the elderberry shrub distinguish this beetle from similar species. This species is completely dependent on the elderberry plant for food and shelter. It feeds on the stems and leaves of the plant at elevations from sea level to 2,300 feet. Emergence coincides with bloom period of the elderberry plants. Valley elderberry longhorn beetle is known to occur in a very limited distribution from southern Shasta County to Kern County. When listed in 1980, the beetle was known from less than 10 locations along the American River, Puda Creek, and Merced River. Today, they have been documented in approximately 190 locations, based mostly on the exit holes from emerging beetles. Now we'll go over some of the additional key species protection measures for this project. These slides won't comprise an exhaustive list of necessary protective measures, but they should provide you with a good idea of what's expected. Please refer to your training booklet for a comprehensive list of species protection measures. There are several general protective measures that need to be followed on this project. I'll go over these quickly, but you should review these measures in your training materials. First of all wildlife should be allowed to leave the job site unharmed. This includes any animals that don't carry state or federal protections. To prevent wildlife entrapment on the project, all excavations, and this includes trenches, holes, and pits, need to be covered at the end of each workday. If covering an excavation is not practical, earthen or wooden escape ramps need to be installed. Additionally, all litter, construction debris, and food-related waste generated on the site needs to be contained in sealed trash containers and removed from the construction area daily. Containing food waste is especially important, as these items tend to attract wildlife, which could ultimately cause project delays. During construction operations, stockpiling of construction materials, portable equipment, vehicles, and supplies needs to be restricted to the designated construction staging areas. The same goes for access roads into and out of the work area. Finally, restrict the disturbance of vegetation outside the work area to the minimum extent possible. If we find nests or burrows for any regulated species mentioned in the previous slides, we'll need to set up a protective no-work buffer around it until it can be demonstrated that the chicks have fledged and the nest is no longer active. Depending on the species, different radii will apply. For instance, Swainson's hawks will require up to a half-mile buffer, and burrowing owl burrows will require a 250 feet of no-work buffer, although this radius for burrowing owls will be reduced during the winter months if there is no active nesting. For all remaining bird species, raptors will require a 500-foot buffer, and all non-raptor birds will require a 100-foot buffer. Furthermore, kit fox dens will require between 50 to 250 feet of no-work buffers, depending on a variety of factors, including if the den contains pups. Bat roosts will require a 50-foot buffer, and finally, all covered mammal, reptile, fish, and invertebrate species discussed in the previous slides will require a 100-foot no-work buffer. We'll finish up here with some important takeaways from this presentation. Perhaps the most important takeaway is remembering what your responsibilities are if you see a regulated species within the project site. Don't touch or approach regulated wildlife and immediately report encounters to your supervisor or the on-site biologist. Keep your training materials somewhere where you can readily access them. If an animal wanders onto the construction site and you're unsure whether it's a cause for concern, your booklets contain the necessary contact information and procedures to follow in order to protect yourself and your company. It is important to remember that you and your company are wholly responsible for following the measures in this training video and its associated training materials, as well as the permits and specifications for this project. So please revisit this video and your training materials as needed. This concludes the Biological Resources Information Program training video. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about what's been covered in this presentation or your training materials, please direct them to your on-site alluvian biologist.